Good morning, everyone. Paul from the innovation community here. Today, I'm with StJohn Deakins, or Singe, and Singe has been working in personal data management and is currently the CEO and founder of CitizenMe, which is aiming to give individuals more power over their data. Great to have you with us.
Thank you. Great to be on your show.
Yeah, great to have you, as I said. Now, tell us a bit about yourself in a few words, and also a bit about CitizenMe as well.
So I've got kind of a background doing internet digital innovation for the last 25 years or so, which I guess I'll tell you through in a second. But the CitizenMe is kind of a culmination of that. So what we're doing at the moment is effectively distributing out personal data to individuals, to people, and giving you the ability to get the full value of that personal data. Personal data kind of fuels the internet. It's a marketplace. There are marketplaces that we all participate in. We're just not aware of the fact that we participate in them. So what we're doing at CitizenMe is kind of enabling brands to talk directly to consumers and what we call citizens, on the internet, and have a kind of a direct and real-time information communication, basically data conversations, effectively.
And where did your career in data really start?
That's a good question. I started off, I did a politics and economics degree, and I ended up temping at British Telecom, managing marketing databases. And I was lucky enough to have a couple of really good managers who kind of gave me some good career advice about planning your own career, kind of really kind of focusing in on finding out what really kind of floats your boat, but by doing generic stuff in your 20s, so you can really kind of understand and appreciate kind of what the different roles inside organizations. So that was at British Telecom, and then I moved into, from there, what was the oldest daily newspaper in the world, which was a company called Lloyd's List, Lloyd's of London Press. So it's the old insurance and shipping newspaper. And I just happened to be there at the time when the internet was really starting to take off. Really got into the potential of the internet and helped Lloyd's List go online back in '96. So first newspaper to do so. And we started making revenues quite quickly because the information was really, really valuable. If you're looking at shipping tables in Hong Kong and it takes you 3 days to get a daily newspaper, the ship's already left the port by the time you get the paper. So that was making profits within about 6 months. And we put kind of Insurance Day and various other newspapers online at the same time, 96, 97. And then moved into a digital agency and really got into kind of innovation and saw the power of transformation working with people like British Airways at the end of the 90s.
Fantastic stuff. So what are you up to now? I mean, what is really the aim to grow CitizenMe?
So for CitizenMe, the purpose, I guess, is, so for the last decade from 2000 through to about 2010, I moved out to Asia, and I basically helped probably around 100 million people get on the internet with platforms that was building out, used by telcos to help people get online. And that was kind of old school SMS, MMS, and then into what was called WAP in the early days, and then became basically just digital connectivity on smartphones. And it kind of became really apparent when I was doing that you've got hundreds of millions of people kind of going online very, very quickly, and they're switching large kind of populations of the world in Latin America, Southeast Asia, South Asia, Africa, onto the internet. But once they get there, they're basically kind of really actually being funneled into a few silos. And you also kind of realize that the real value, I mean, telcos are basically selling pipes and connectivity, but the real value for the internet is driven off personalization and personal data, which drives all of the big kind of Silicon Valley services. So from there, you kind of realize actually there's this kind of gap that needs to be filled, which is personal agency with that data. If you can empower individuals to actually have a copy, so you're not replacing anything, but you're just getting a copy of data from everywhere on the internet, and you can run that on your own smartphone, and you can apply AI, your own personal AI on your smartphone to give you personal insights, those become incredibly valuable. And when you aggregate those up to the hundreds of thousands at a time, you basically provide a really valuable new source of information for the internet as a whole, and especially for brands and companies that are dealing with customers.
For sure. And what's really kept your interest about working in the data space for so long?
Well, I was going to say earlier, I mean, when I first started working for agency.com, which is then became part of Omnicom, we worked with British Airways. British Airways were going through this transformation. They realized that the internet was a big thing. This was probably about 97, 98, and was going to have a massive impact. And there was kind of a very far-sighted CEO at the time who basically told the whole organization in 2 years they were going to switch from 2% of revenues going digital to 50% of revenues. Had a massive impact on the business. And we kind of quickly kind of worked out what areas of the business could be, what revenues could be digitized most quickly, through web portals, through business services, for instance, and business connectivity. And we enabled the organization to hit the goal. And from that, you realize the transformation that can happen. After that, I worked with T-Mobile, and kind of came up with what's now called omnichannel, multiple digital channels. And you realize that when people move between digital places, just like moving between physical places, you're changing digital context, and therefore you want to be spoken to in different ways. But you want to connect up around the individual. And that was really profoundly interesting, because then you realize that actually what we're doing digitally is really a mirror in many ways of what we do in real life. And those two things are starting to merge, and they've certainly done that over the last kind of 15 years or so. Our digital lives and our physical lives are becoming pretty much the same thing. We used to talk about going online as being a destination, and now the two are pretty much seamless, and completely kind of intertwined. And that's fascinating, because that's basically a completely new way of society working. And then you realize that we're moving out of the industrial era, which is all about kind of physical things and replacing brawn, and we're actually moving now into a digital era, which is about information and knowledge, and enhancing our ability to gain that knowledge. We're just now at the point where we're really seeing it coming through, and it's kind of accelerating very, very fast, which is exciting.
It is very exciting, and I think it's hard to talk about people these days not having a digital footprint of some sort. It's kind of part and parcel with the society that we live in. But when it comes to personal data, how is government policy like GDPR in 2018, and also more recently the California Consumer Privacy Act, going to really affect the landscape moving forward, both for organizations but also for individuals as well?
It's fascinating, because there was a lot of talk at the time, when kind of legislation came through in Europe, that it was going to really have an immediate effect, especially a lot of people in the data and privacy space, and kind of chief privacy officers, data officers, etc. And actually, it's taken a while to come through, but it is having a kind of a huge but slow-moving impact. So GDPR has obviously had an impact in the short term, but it's actually led to things like CCPA in California. CCPA in California is being followed on. There's legislation called CPRA in California, which is like CCPA 2.0. So there's more legislation coming through. If you talk to execs in large, say, American companies, there's a belief that CCPA will kind of become the default. If the Democrats get in later this year, it will happen quickly. If Republicans stay in, it will happen state by state and more slowly. But in the next 5 to 10 years, GDPR type legislation will become the global norm, if it's across states in the US, for instance. And there's also regulation coming through in Australia, Singapore. A lot of countries are coming up with new regulation. Japan is looking to leapfrog GDPR and actually give people a right to their own data with data banks. So certainly in the next 4 or 5 years, we're kind of at the start of this shift. And you're seeing things like advertising technology, which pretty much kind of relied on unconsented personal data kind of being kind of thrown around in billions of transactions a second for digital advertising, are starting to have a really, really tough time. All of that kind of activity is now shifting because of GDPR into the big silos of Facebook and Google and Amazon. So those kind of changes are massive, big shifts, but they're happening over years, not months.
Yeah, I find that very interesting in terms of development. There was a lot of talk about GDPR a couple of years ago. It's almost like it's been swept under the carpet, but I think it's really important that people are still aware of their own rights, but also organizations and how they can approach these kind of challenges as well. You mentioned a few earlier, but what are some of the other major successes that you've achieved over your career?
I was just going to say on that GDPR point, there's kind of an immediate reaction to GDPR, which is making sure that you're compliant with the regulation. And then there's a systemic kind of impact that it has. And that systemic impact is taking kind of time to work through, but it's much, much bigger than the noise that we had around GDPR and all those emails that we got telling us that, would we still consent to our email being kept by a company, that kind of thing. That was kind of the froth on top of the move, really. Anyway, sorry. So in terms of other things I've done, in terms of transformation, the British Airways experience was huge. Obviously, with Lloyd's of London kind of shifting them digital for a newspaper that was started in 1734 or something, was massive. The most interesting thing I did through while I was in Asia was actually kind of enabling those hundreds of millions of people to get online through kind of digital platforms, and seeing that kind of wave of the mobile phone becoming the primary digital connectivity device. And then with CitizenMe, we've kind of been leading we've been around for 6 or 7 years now. We had a first version of the platform, which was much more about kind of activism and kind of reaction to what was happening with personal data. CitizenMe, as it stands now, is much more proactive, and we're recognised. We've won loads of awards. We're recognised generally in the industry as being the leading player in the space, and I certainly believe that we're pushing that conversation forward in terms of the way that the internet will structure around data. And there was obviously other big voices. Tim Berners-Lee's pushing something called Solid. So Tim Berners-Lee, who kind of invented the World Wide Web, is pushing Solid, which is again about distributed personal data. So there's kind of a movement taking place, and I'm kind of very proud that we're at the forefront of that movement.
Absolutely. And how are you currently leveraging technology to your advantage, and what effects do you think it will have over the next few years?
We're at the forefront technologically. We're at the forefront of distributed technology. So we host everything out on people's individual smartphones. So there's an application you download. You do fun activities. In the process of doing those fun activities, you pull a copy of your data from various different places around the web, and that could be anywhere from obvious places like Facebook and Instagram through to your census information and in the UK, your DVLA driving license information. It could be health kit, step count, the apps that you use every day. So you get a copy of all this information, which is currently used by other people that you're not fully aware of. And that all stays on your device, that stays on your smartphone. We then have algorithms which are completely transparent to you, which you can use to surface these insights. And those insights could be things like, based on my step count and the weather, that I'm generally slightly happier when it's sunnier, and I do more exercise when it's sunnier. Unless I'm sitting in a shopping center, in which case I'm doing the step count and it's sunny outside, but I'm less happy because I don't particularly like shopping centers. So you get those kind of contextual insights about yourself, but that's really valuable for other people. We do all of that at the edge. So we've got 270,000 people using the platform, and that effectively becomes like a global distributed database. So all the actual data sits out in India, the Philippines, Brazil, US, UK, France, etc., all out on the edge. And then we have a platform that talks to all of those different data repositories, if you like. So that's really, really cutting edge stuff. That's the way the future, for me, the way of the future of the internet. It's the way that things will naturally go. There's massive structural benefits in terms of efficiencies for use of electricity and things, but also in terms of security. We don't hold any data. We've got a zero data platform. All the data sits out with individuals. We just connect people, individuals, citizens, to brands and health researchers and anyone else who has an interest in having those data conversations. Completely radical architecture. We were lauded by the Royal Society for it last year. So that for me is kind of cutting edge tech. It's talked about a lot when people kind of talk about things like blockchain. We've done a lot of research into where places we can use blockchain, but it's not quite ready for us yet in terms of transactions. We're running at about 4,000 transactions per second. And blockchain Ethereum runs at about 14 at the moment. So it's got a ways to go to catch up. But certainly see that kind of part of the future as another distributed technology. The other tech we're using is distributed AI. So we're increasingly pushing algorithms out to devices, and then actually training up algorithms across devices too.
Pretty interesting stuff. So how has COVID-19 affected your role as the CEO and also the wider organization?
It's had a huge impact. I mean, organizationally, for me as an individual, for the organization, also for our customers as well. For me as an individual, we had a team in London, and then we have a team of developers who are remote. And obviously, as soon as about a week before lockdown in the UK, we all switched to remote. And the impact on the organization's been amazing. We're now on equal footing being remote. We use Slack a huge amount. We use lots of kind of video chats, but we're way more coordinated than we were when we were a hybrid organization, kind of half physical office and half remote. Far more efficient, far better communication. For me personally, I'm actually in much better contact across the entire team than we were when we were in an office. And also the team that were working in office are much happier because they're not doing one of the team members is doing 3 hours commuting every day, and she feels she's kind of gained her life back. So that's been a really massive impact. And there have been challenges around kind of organization, and there's lots of stuff we can still learn. And there are organizations that have been doing this for quite a while. People like WordPress have been doing this for a decade almost. So there's lots of learning we're making. There's the social side of the organization and interaction we obviously need to make up for. We have plans for that. From our customer point of view, though, we've seen it's becoming a cliche, but a rapid acceleration to digitization. So we provide our first minimum viable market, if you like, is insights, and we provide organizations within the moment always on insights. You can ask people to take a picture of their dog and the dog food they use and get that back straight away because it's all distributed out on devices. And there's been a massive uptick in interest in that kind of platform, and those kind of immediate insights with the data behind that as well. The other big impact though has been in the last probably 5 or 6 months, so just a bit before COVID hit, but it's certainly accelerated, is companies looking to license our technology. So we've got large international telcos, credit card companies running proof of concepts on our privacy enhancing tech, if you like, our distributed data tech, zero data platform, looking to use that for their own internal services, things like loyalty programs, and that has really kind of taken off in the last 3-4 months. So I think we've just seen again, it's become a bit of a cliche, but 5 years worth of change happening in 3 or 4 months, just in terms of kind of attitudes and the acceleration that's happened.
Fantastic stuff. So how would you describe your leadership style when you're working with your team members?
I generally, I'm sure they tell you, I'm quite hands off. I look at kind of what I try to do is find good people, give them kind of vision, direction, and goals, and let them get onto it, and then kind of check in with them regularly in terms of kind of how they're kind of approaching those goals and tackling them, and kind of try and take more of a coaching attitude and a kind of a guiding attitude. But I think you have to let people kind of find their own path, especially in an area like us where actually we want lots of diverse ideas and diverse thinking in terms of kind of the potential paths. And then once you decide on a path to take, do lots of testing and kind of iteratively learn, but setting a direction above that in terms of kind of the goal that we have, the goal that we have.
And what do you think the biggest mistake you made during your career was?
That's a really good question. I'm sure there are many. I'm sure other people tell you mistakes as well. Something that's really interesting for me is I'd always had this. So when I was at BT, I was kind of given this advice about kind of creating your own career path and really kind of trying to tune into what really kind of floats your boat, and what kind of what direction enables you to thrive. And I always had this kind of idea about kind of setting up my own business, and I kind of figured, okay, I'm going to do a departmental role, and then I'll take on a regional VP role, and then after I've done that and I've got some experience, I'll then kind of go and do a startup. And actually, I probably could have done a startup 5 years before I did. And there's this scary thing about when you first become an entrepreneur. After being inside an organization, everything's kind of handled for you. You've got an HR department, you've got a finance department, you've got all these support kind of ancillary services, and so you feel like you've got a lot of things taken care of, and the idea of kind of going out on your own is actually quite scary. And then once you've done it, you actually realize it's relatively straightforward as long as you have a clear idea about what it is, what the objective is, and you've got a good idea about how you're going to approach it, and what process you're going to use. It's a lot more straightforward than I'd certainly imagined. But it can be quite a scary thing. That last company I worked for as well they ended up having 4 or 5 different VCs on the board, who were all very nice individuals, but had different, what are called event horizons in terms of what they thought was going to happen to the company. And it was kind of running without a CEO for a good kind of 12 months. And I was bringing in about 70% of the revenue from Asia. It's a British company. And you kind of then see how, in some ways, dysfunctional companies can become. So I could have left that company certainly kind of a couple of years before and started up the company that I then went on to found. Yeah, and I sold that company 5 years later to American private equity. So that kind of, for me, I guess the lesson from that is if you believe strongly enough, you should go do it, and you should jump and follow that dream.
Yeah, I definitely know the feeling there. What's the best piece of advice you ever received?
That's a good question. I think that kind of question about kind of planning your own career and kind of listening to your own inner voice, if you like, about kind of what your direction should be and where you're going. It's easy for all of us to get into ruts and get into kind of a routine. And I think kind of we all know inside when there's something that we should really be doing. In terms of kind of advice, I guess, about kind of building stuff, which is what I feel like I do. It's a bizarre one. It's my dad, when I was building we built a boat together when I was about kind of 8 or 9. My dad really built the boat, and I kind of put some varnish on it and things. And there's a flotation tank in the sailing boat, and I remember kind of like slapping on the varnish inside the tank and not really kind of pay much attention to it. My dad basically saying that you should do it properly for two reasons. The first one is because you're making this perfect boat, making all this attention to the outside, and you want it to be as beautiful on the inside as the outside. And then the second point being, you might find yourself a mile offshore one day, and the boat's just rotted through, and you've got a long swim back to the shore. So you kind of pay attention on the inside as much as the outside, which I thought was great advice.
That is great advice as well. What is your top working from home tip?
I think it's structure and routine. So I tend to structure my day. I'm actually working slightly longer hours than I probably did. I mean, I used to listen to podcasts and things on the train. I now take kind of 7:30 to about 9 is kind of quiet downtime. I can kind of plan, I can write things. And that then 9 o'clock, I tend to kick into kind of team catch-ups and things. And then the afternoons tend to be meetings and more admin work. And having that structure kind of really helps me plan through the day, and also kind of planning the team. But because those slots are a lot more, I mean, they tend to be a little bit Zoom and video driven, but my diary is a lot more efficient now. I don't have like half-hour travel times between meetings and that kind of thing. So yeah, that kind of structure and planning your day ahead may be obvious, but I think is incredibly important.
I completely agree. What are you really curious about right now?
I'm really curious about. So I mean, what we're doing feels like it's going to be the norm. I think in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see a big switch. What really fascinates me is things like is the way we're dealing with artificial intelligence and the conversations around that. And it's still a little bit, kind of metropolis, kind of old school. We're going to have iRobot, bad AI, and there's lots of stuff around some of the more advanced AI and kind of fake news and things. The new GPT-3 from OpenAI is really fascinating, just in terms of kind of the natural language processing being used there. But I think there's also this kind of media. It's very easy to write a horror story and a fear story about the perils. What I think is really fascinating is we're on the cusp of having something. Actually, friend Neil Lawrence, who's a machine learning professor at Cambridge, coined System 0 AI. So we've got this kind of System 1 and System 2 thinking, which is Kahneman, where kind of System 2 is our deliberate, kind of thoughtful thought process when we come to a decision. System 1 is our kind of gut reaction. And Neil came up with this idea of System 0 AI. So whatever AI we come up with has always got to serve our System 1 and System 2 thinking. And that, I think, we're kind of on the cusp of getting to, where if we can have complete transparency about the AIs that are working for us, the algorithms, the scripts, the models, and we know how accurate they are, and we can integrate them into our System 1 and System 2, our brains, the way we think, and not integrate physically, but just in terms of our behaviors and our habits. That then becomes really powerful. And what that really means is we have our own personal AI agent. And I think we're kind of pretty 4 to 5 years away from those things becoming really solid. Things like Siri and kind of the Amazon kind of equivalent, they're kind of basically chatbots. I think we're going to have something which is much more profoundly kind of personal for us. But for that to happen, it has to happen with us. It can't happen in the cloud. If you lose your Wi-Fi connection, you can't use your agent, right? So we have to have stuff deployed with us on our smartphones, which are personal agents, which really massively help us in our day-to-day routines. They kind of become tools like a bicycle helps us. Instead of walking, we can become much more efficient by cycling, which I think is an old Steve Jobs kind of term. But same thing for computers. We're at a stage where the tools really will serve us, but they have to be System 0. They have to be set up and created to serve us as individuals.
Makes a lot of sense. Who is your favorite thought leader in this space, or author, maybe even outside the space?
Yeah, it's interesting. So for me, kind of the first sci-fi author I ever got into was H.G. Wells. He was like, for me, the kind of the first sci-fi author of the 20th century, like kind of post Jules Verne. And so a lot of that kind of early thinking, I think, is still really relevant today. And it's basically kind of driving a lot of the kind of fundamentals of kind of sci-fi. And sci-fi is basically just speculation about our future, right? Kind of good or bad. So it's technology and human condition combined, which I find fascinating. So I mean, going through those kind of sci-fi authors, I find fascinating. H.G. Wells through to Arthur C. Clarke, obviously, and then actually things like Black Mirror. It's like if you look at kind of the kind of dystopian future side of thing, I find that fascinating, just in terms of kind of giving us warnings about where our future may go. In terms of kind of slightly less dystopian, people like Yuval Harari, obviously kind of very popular at the moment, and that's kind of fantastic set of books. I also like things like kind of some of the original kind of Stoic thinkers when you look at the human condition. So you look at people like Marcus Aurelius and things, just in terms of reminding us about humanity, if that makes sense. Not quite contemporary, but I think they're really, really important voices. Also all the Enlightenment thinkers like Tom Paine and things as well.
I think that some of the best ideas have been around for the longest. Meditations by Aurelius is a difficult but insightful read.
It's huge. Yeah. It's an amazing book. And then, I mean, people like Tom Paine and the Enlightenment thinkers, I mean, a lot of that thinking, I mean, about, which led to the American Constitution, is so relevant right now as well, because we have a new era. So how do you apply thinking on kind of liberty and right to self in a digital era where we're all suddenly connected as a global nation, right? We are one nation. So how does all that thinking now apply? So the thinking's still completely relevant. It's just our context has shifted, and we're all kind of a little bit lost because of the shift. So there's a bit of catching up to do, I think.
Agreed. What advice would you give for aspiring leaders in data?
I'd say remember it's the stories. So I mean, talking about kind of old thinkers. I mean, if you look at Plato, Plato basically said about storytelling being the greatest gift. It was kind of most powerful gift. It's remembering the stories in the data, and it's the human stories in data. I think, sorry, Plato said storytellers rule the world, and it's those human stories in the data which are profoundly important for us. It's very easy to get lost in the detail. And the biggest story that we can tell for me is liberty, and about human agency and human progress. And we can enable that through data, which is, for me, profoundly important and exciting, also slightly scary. So yeah, basically remember the human stories in the data.
Fantastic advice from Singe Deakins from CitizenMe. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.